BOE, the company that built the screen you are probably reading this on, took glass substrate technology from internal research to a pilot production line in roughly the time Intel spent moving the same work from one lab building to another. That is not a punchline. That is a split time. And the question it opens is not who invented the glass panel that may carry the next generation of artificial intelligence chips. It is whether Intel can lock in the supply chain before a display giant rewrites what chip packaging even means. The contest runs on two clocks, present tense. Intel's clock and BOE's. 3 legs, 1 reversal, and a finish line that may be moving while both sides are still running. The object at the center of this race is a single sheet of engineered borosilicate glass, roughly the size of a laptop lid. It carries the wiring that used to live in organic plastic laminate, the flexible, familiar substrate that has connected chiplets for a generation. The glass version runs flatter, expands less under heat, and in theory allows finer wiring at higher density. Intel is betting its next packaging generation on it. BOE already knows how to cut, coat, and move glass at scale, just for a different product entirely. That difference in context is where the race begins. Intel's engagement with glass as a packaging material has a research lineage that traces back further than the public announcement suggests. The company made its glass substrate program formal around 2023, but serious materials research was underway for several years before that milestone appeared on a roadmap. The program has survived multiple executive cycles. It sits formally inside Intel's advanced packaging strategy. The engineering problem Intel is trying to solve is real and specific. Organic substrates warp under the heat generated by high-power artificial intelligence workloads because the material expands at a different rate than the silicon chiplets sitting on top of it. Glass does not warp the same way. Intel's published materials describe flatness tolerances and panel sizes aimed at next-generation chiplet interconnect, the dense web of short-range wiring that links processor dies on a single package. And Intel is not coming to glass cold. The company's process knowledge from photovoltaic work and microelectromechanical systems research gave its packaging team a foundation in glass handling that predates the current semiconductor packaging application by years. BOE entered glass substrate development later on the public record. The company's patent filings and industry conference papers document the substrate research, though independent benchmarking of their chip-grade specifications is limited. What the published record does not capture is the inheritance BOE carried into this leg. BOE's engineers have been working with large panel glass at micron-level tolerances for over a decade in display manufacturing, not chip manufacturing, display manufacturing. The process steps overlap more than most semiconductor analysts initially credited: coating, patterning, cutting, inspecting at scale. BOE did not start from zero on glass. It started from a display glass processing base that Intel has never had. So, the research clock looks longer for Intel when you read the semiconductor packaging timestamps. But the relevant capability clock, large panel glass handling, process discipline at industrial volume, was already running at BOE before the chip application was conceived. Think of it like 2 runners in a relay. Intel has been running the semiconductor glass leg for years. BOE picked up the baton later, but they had already been warming up in a parallel lane called display manufacturing. The stopwatch shows different start times. The legs to the handoff zone are not as different as those start times imply. Intel's clock on research maturity: several years of dedicated semiconductor-grade glass work, with public milestones across multiple annual roadmap cycles. BOE's clock on the same leg, a shorter dedicated run, but drawing on a decade plus of panel glass process knowledge that compresses the effective gap. The lead Intel holds in calendar years is narrower in actual process readiness than the start dates suggest. Gap. Closer than the headline. Now, move to the leg where that display inheritance stops being background and becomes the race itself. Manufacturing scale is where the clocks diverge most sharply, and where the physical reality of BOE's position is easiest to render as an object rather than an abstraction. A Generation 10.5 display glass panel, the kind BOE already runs through its facilities every day, measures roughly 2.94 meters by 3.37 meters. That is not a lab sample. That is a piece of glass larger than a large dining room table. Intel's packaging lines were never designed to handle anything close to that footprint. BOEs were. When BOE says it can scale glass substrate output, the engineering ask embedded in that statement is smaller than the identical sentence means coming from Intel. That is not a marginal difference. It is a structural one. Intel's glass substrate manufacturing, as of the most recent public information, sits at a pilot or early production stage. Intel's packaging operations in Penang, Costa Rica, and Vietnam are optimized for existing organic substrate workflows. Panel-level glass processing at the dimensions needed for artificial intelligence chip substrates is not a capability those facilities were built around. Retrofitting or building out the necessary tooling is a capital and process challenge Intel has acknowledged as part of its glass substrate timeline. No independent source has confirmed high-volume glass panel output from an Intel facility. Intel's own language frames glass substrates as a future production capability. Analyst estimates place meaningful volume, enough to matter for a product launch, several years out, though Intel disputes the longer timelines. BOE's situation on this leg is structurally reversed. The company operates some of the largest glass panel production facilities on Earth, built for display manufacturing, but running the same fundamental process steps that chip-grade glass substrates require at tolerances that would need to be tightened for semiconductor use. The tightening is the hard part, but the base is already there. Reports from Chinese industry sources suggest BOE's substrate pilot line is running at wafer-equivalent throughput rates that exceed what Intel has publicly claimed for its own glass program. No independent third party has verified those figures. Treat them as company-adjacent claims, not established benchmarks. But even discounting them, the infrastructure advantage is real in a way that throughput numbers alone do not fully capture. My read. The panel-level advantage BOE holds on this leg is the most underestimated split in semiconductor packaging right now. Most analysts frame this as Intel versus China, a geopolitical contest between two national industrial strategies. I would frame it differently. It is a packaging engineer versus a display engineer, and on raw throughput, the display engineer is already winning one of the legs that matters most. The panel count is not a prediction. It is a physical fact about existing infrastructure. Intel's clock on manufacturing scale, pilot stage throughput, with high volume production measured in years, not quarters, by most outside estimates. BOE's clock on the same leg, pilot stage throughput for chip-grade glass, built on a panel processing infrastructure that already runs at display industry volume, giving a ramp rate Intel structurally cannot match from a standing start. Gap. BOE pulls ahead on this leg. BOE leads on scale. The infrastructure advantage is real, and the ramp rate is faster. But a pilot line producing samples for industry presentations is not the same object as a qualified supply chain, shipping into a production artificial intelligence accelerator. That distinction is the next leg, and it is where the clock flips. Honest pushback on my own read. I have been tracking BOE's yield numbers through secondary reports and trade press, and I am not confident the gap on manufacturing scale is as durable as the panel count suggests. Volume is not qualification. The next leg makes that tension explicit. Semiconductor-grade glass substrates require defect densities orders of magnitude lower than display glass. A single particle inclusion that would be invisible on a television panel can kill a chiplet interconnect. A copper via that is 200 nanometers off-center on a glass substrate can be a functional failure. The measurement regime alone is a different discipline from anything BOE has run at scale. Intel's qualification playbook, thermal cycling, burn-in, long-term reliability testing under artificial intelligence workload power envelopes is a known, painful, multi-year process that cannot be compressed by panel throughput alone. Intel has run this playbook before, on embedded multi-die interconnect bridge and Foveros programs, both of which went through full qualification cycles, from pilot yield to volume production to third-party integration. That institutional knowledge of what a full reliability sign-off actually costs in time and failures is not trivial. Independent analysts who track advanced packaging consistently name qualification as the longest leg in substrate development. Intel has run this leg before on related materials. BOE has not run it at all for semiconductor end use. BOE's substrate samples have not, as of current reporting, been independently qualified by a major artificial intelligence chip customer. The company's claims of meeting chip-grade specifications are based on internal testing and presentations to prospective customers, standard for this stage of development, but not the same as a past qualification audit from a major chip designer or a hyperscaler. The strongest case that BOE's lead on this leg is a mirage. Throughput is a lagging indicator of qualification readiness. BOE can run glass faster than Intel, but cannot yet prove that the glass it runs meets the specification that matters, the one printed on an artificial intelligence chip customer's incoming inspection form. Think of qualification like a health inspection for a restaurant kitchen, not a cooking competition. BOE can cook more food faster. The throughput is real. But if the inspector has not signed off on the kitchen, the restaurant is not open. Intel has passed this inspection before on adjacent materials. BOE is still scheduling the appointment. The counter-argument is also real, and it deserves full weight. BOE is not trying to qualify display glass as a chip substrate. It is building a new process on a glass handling base that is already sophisticated. The yield learning curve may be steep, but BOE is not starting from the ground floor of glass process knowledge. And here is the detail that the West-centric view of the supply chain tends to underweight. China's domestic artificial intelligence chip ecosystem, companies including Cambricon and Byron, developing accelerators under United States export restrictions, creates a qualification customer base that does not require Intel's approval or a Western chip designer's specification sheet. BOE may qualify a glass substrate for a domestic artificial intelligence chip before Western observers even know the audit was attempted. Whether that qualification counts in the same supply chain conversation is a question the next 12 months will answer. The lead on yield is Intel's, for now, and it is real, not a mirage. But it is not permanent, and the domestic customer pathway makes it less permanent than the Western view of the supply chain assumes. Intel's clock on qualification. A known process with institutional knowledge of what full reliability sign-off on a novel substrate requires, measured in years of iteration, but years Intel has already partly run on related programs. BOE's clock on the same leg, not yet started in any documented public sense, with no confirmed artificial intelligence chip customer qualification underway. Gap, Intel takes the split back and takes it clearly. 12 months out, Intel still leads on qualification discipline and on the specific specification set that Western artificial intelligence chip customers require. BOE leads on panel scale throughput and on ramp rate for the manufacturing leg. Neither clock has hit zero. The race has become a two-leg contest. Intel must prove it can scale. BOE must prove it can qualify. And the order in which those legs get run determines who the artificial intelligence chip industry calls for glass substrates through 2026 and beyond. My call, BOE closes the qualification gap faster than Intel closes the scale gap, because qualification is a learnable process, and panel scale infrastructure is a multi-billion-dollar capital build that Intel is not positioned to sprint. But BOE closes it first for a domestic Chinese artificial intelligence chip customer, not for a Western chip designer. Those are different finish lines, and they may cross in different order. Imagine two runners in a race where the finish line is a ribbon, but halfway through someone moves one ribbon 40 meters to the left. Intel is still running toward the original tape. BOE may hit the relocated one first. Whether that counts as winning depends on who drew the course map. The glass panel, that laptop lid-sized sheet of engineered borosilicate, is still the object both clocks are running toward. Intel wants to put it in a Western artificial intelligence data center. BOE wants to put it in a Chinese one. The panel does not care. The question is which supply chain gets qualified first, and whether the word first means the same thing on both sides of the export control line. This was never a story about who has the better glass. It was always about whose clock is moving faster on the leg that the other side is weakest on. Intel is fast on yield. BOE is fast on scale. The race is not over. It has just reached the leg where the gap is tightest, and the next split determines everything. Both clocks are running. The question is which one runs out of track first, and whether the finish line moves before either of them gets there. Here is what I want you to sit with. If BOE qualifies a glass substrate for a Chinese domestic artificial intelligence accelerator before Intel ships glass in volume to a Western customer, does that count as winning the race, or does it mean they ran a different race entirely? Drop your read in the comments. And if you want to be in the room when the next split comes in, subscribe and turn on notifications, because this one is not slowing down.